My name is Yaa Bosumtwi. I have a master's degree in public health from Columbia University, and I work for Columbia University on a project in Ghana called MOTEC, Mobile Technology for Community Health. Between February and March 2010, my supervisor, Dr. Phillips, ordered me verbally and in writing to commit fraud for Columbia University. I resisted and said no. He continued to threaten me and blackmail me using my job as ransom to force me to carry out his illegal orders. I was under immense pressure from Dr. Phillips and my supervisors to break the law. Finally, I sent my supervisor an email stating that I will not commit fraud on March 27, 2010. Then, to punish me for my refusal to commit fraud, Dr. Phillips terminated me on March 29, 2010. This is what happened. Columbia manages the MOTEC research project in the Upper East region of Ghana, using the Ghana Health Services and the Navrongo Health Research Center as their conduit for research. I was hired as a staff associate in New York on October 8, 2009, and appointed program manager and editor of the MOTEC Research Newsletter on October 12, 2009. The MOTEC project is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and is managed and controlled by Columbia University and the Grameen Foundation. They control all research on the ground, hiring of all MOTEC employees, and all project scheduling. My supervisor, Dr. Phillips, repeatedly asked me to omit and conceal information about Gates, Grameen, and Columbia University from our research newsletter, and I refused. I wrote several emails to Dr. Phillips and Columbia University explaining that in research, one has an ethical duty to state names, funders, and all participants who have significant control of the research project, especially in light of the fact that this MOTEC research newsletter was the project's first public communication document that policymakers and stakeholders were going to read. Dr. Phillips dismissed my emphatic refusals to commit fraud. Instead, he arrogantly modified his illegal request to me and asked me to minimize and bury the significant Gates, Columbia, and Grameen partnership information in the back of our research newsletter, or else I would be fired. Again, I refused, because what he was requesting is fundamentally unethical, due to the fact that I would be knowingly and deliberately concealing and misrepresenting significant information about Columbia's controlling interests and partnership with the Grameen Foundation. Asking an employee to deliberately mislead and lie to government officials and stakeholders is asking an employee to break the law, because that information is relied on by investors, funders, and policymakers making decisions about a product. Enron and more recently Goldman Sachs and other banks have been charged with fraud and misrepresentation in the United States. My junior supervisor, Dr. Jemima Frimpong, also a professor at Columbia University, tried and failed to convince me on Jim's behalf. She became extra bold and said Dr. Phillips is the principal investigator, so he can decide to do whatever he sees fit. So she does not understand what ethical code of conduct I am speaking about. On March 27th, when I could no longer take the harassment and emotional distress, I sent Columbia a final email stating the following: my ethical codes of professional conduct are ingrained in my mind, where public health officials should not deliberately skew, omit, fudge, or minimize significant facts for desired outcomes and desired perceptions. Our trust and professional integrity to advise policymakers depends on us giving them accurate facts in any document we produce. Therefore, I will not violate or breach that code of ethical conduct under any circumstances, and especially not when I will be working at the Ministry of Health in Ghana in the near future.
On March 29, 2010, exactly 2 days after Yaa sent that final letter of defiance, refusing to commit fraud, the project supervisor, Dr. James Phillips, acting like a colonial master, and his co-conspirators, Dr. Linda Freed and Dr. John Santelli, terminated her in a letter sent by email. The termination letter had been written 14 days earlier and leaked to Yaa Bosumtwi through colleagues in an effort to intimidate her to acquiesce. She never backed down.
Another issue was, soon after I was hired as program manager in October 2009, I was put in charge of the budget that was already in place. I discovered that people doing the same work and having the same academic degrees were being paid at vastly different rates. Sometimes the pay disparity was as high as 90%. My colleague with the same MPH as mine was hired in Ghana and was being paid about 20% of my full compensation. Even if he was a part-time worker, he should have at least been paid 50% of my salary. Please remember that this is a multi-billion-dollar Ivy League institution. I do believe that part-time janitors at Columbia University in New York are paid more than Ghanaians with public health degrees hired by Columbia University in Ghana. Section 10B of the Labor Act 2003, Act 651, provides that the right of a worker includes the right to receive equal pay for equal work without distinction of any kind. It is evident that the laws of Ghana prohibit discrimination in wages when people perform work of equal description. Columbia believes it is above the law in Ghana. They only respect laws in America. It is important to charge Columbia University with the crime of fraud because their illegal employment practices, threats, blackmail, and fraud are a crime against Ghanaian society, as they would aptly explain in the United States. Therefore, Columbia University must be charged to the full extent of the law to force end the illegal employment and management practices in Ghana, because in a global environment, you respect the rule of law in the country you are operating in. If any Ghanaian professor working in the United States threatened and blackmailed an employee to misrepresent and conceal significant facts from the United States Department of Health and stakeholders, that professor would be charged with fraud for a crime against the state. Furthermore, it is especially important that Columbia is punished and used as an example because Columbia University purports to be a paragon of virtue, academic excellence, with renowned professors like Jeffrey Sachs. Columbia University goes around the world preaching, teaching, and instructing us Africans on ethics, management, governance, and transparency, while they remain a privileged class of people allowed to break laws with impunity. I believe that in our democratic, social, and academic environment in Ghana, powerful foreign corporations and interests should not be allowed to drown out the voices of professional Ghanaian citizens and academics seeking truth, transparency, and equitable treatment. We are not a colony of Columbia University.
Since announcing her lawsuit and advocacy campaign on May 15, 2010, at the University of Ghana in the capital, Accra, Yaa Bosumtwi continues to receive calls from doctors and research professionals who have known and worked with Dr. Phillips for nearly 2 decades in Ghana. They have made several allegations of research fraud and misconduct against Dr. James Phillips for over a decade's work. It then became clear to Miss Bosumtwi that her issue was only the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Phillips had been so bold and blatant about his illegal written requests because he had operated with unquestioned control for decades in Ghana. In Africa, communities that are economically deprived do not have the confidence of community support to challenge unscrupulous, wealthy foreign researchers bearing financial benefits and jobs. The most specific and egregious allegations with evidence of fraud involved the Navrongo experiment, which did not provide conclusive evidence that maternal and childhood Millennium Development Goals are achievable in rural Africa, and where Dr. Phillips did not obtain individual consent with full disclosure to use experimental birth control on poor and mainly uneducated women who were used as human subjects in Ghana, similar to Nigeria versus Pfizer in 2007, followed by his community health-based programs, where research and research data have been fabricated and skewed to support Dr. Phillips' desired outcomes for funding and academic recognition. Dr. Phillips routinely circumvents ethical research protocols and independent ethical review boards in Ghana.